Get your counters ready because a new model just dropped, and I'm really, really excited for this one. Kimi K2.5 is here, and you really should not sleep on this release. Believe it or not, Kimi K2 has been my default model for a while now. I found it to be really nice for things like writing and just general feedback. I use it as my default in T3 chat and have for a while. It's even really good at stuff like tool calling for search and whatnot. That said, it had its weaknesses. It wasn't as good at code as a lot of the state-of-the-art models from the major labs, and even was a bit behind to other open-weight models like Minimax and GLM. It also didn't have any vision capabilities, which was really rough for me. It's silly, but one of my common use cases is to just like take a picture of some numbers and ask it to add them and things like that. So K2 fell short for me in a handful of ways, but was still my daily driver for chat tasks, and I like it a lot. That's why it's the default in T3 chat to this day. Not only does K2.5 fix all of my issues, it goes way further. It does things I didn't think any open weight model could do before. It introduces some really crazy concepts like agent swarms, spinning up to 100 sub-agents up to solve a task. And of course, it's still open weight, it's still cheap as hell to run, and all of the benchmarks are looking insane, putting them above and beyond even Opus 4.5 in a handful of benchmarks. I've been playing with this model a ton, going through what everyone else has done with it, and even building full apps from scratch, like this image generation studio. I just had it build entirely itself. There is so much to dive into here, and I can't wait to do it with y'all right after a word from today's sponsor. AI agents are great at writing code and using APIs, but what happens when you can't work around a problem with those two tools? Like, I don't know, trying to access information from a website that doesn't have it over API, or maybe they just have a really restrictive API where you can't get quite what you want. It'd be really nice if the agent could just use a browser, right? Well, that's what Kernel's here for. It's the fastest browser your agents can use for getting real work done. I'm using it myself on a bunch of side projects, including my new YouTube thumbnail generator. Not for generating thumbnails from scratch, but taking existing videos and proposing new thumbnail ideas. I click generate, and the first thing it does is scrapes my existing YouTube channel to find recent videos. When I first started building this, my agent told me to go get a YouTube API key, and I tried, and I failed, because getting YouTube API keys requires a really long, miserable process. So I told my agent about Kernel, and it whipped this up first try with no issues. With this build, it chose to use Playwright directly, which honestly makes a lot of sense. We spin up a kernel instance, we create the browser, we connect to it, we send it to the page we want, and now we can get the items straight from the page. This is great if you can run Playwright on your box, but you don't even have to if you don't want to. In this example, I have a whole separate kernel directory that will auto-sync my actions up whenever I make changes. And now I can just call it by calling kernel.invocations.create on the action that I defined in this file. In my scraper.ts, I have app.action scrape channel, and now this is accessible from whatever else I'm using, in this case, Convex for my backend. And here we are, a bunch of thumbnails generated based on existing videos, thumbnails, titles, and all of that. It actually got this content from the real web page and used it to generate something new. Your AI gets way smarter when it can access the web, so tell it can at soydev.link/kernel. First, I want to start with the benchmarks, and then I want to dive into the custom functionality that's so interesting here, especially around swarms. I have a bunch of them spun up in my other browser here that have been doing all sorts of interesting tasks. And of course, everyone's favorite, how is it for code? I've been using it to build a bunch of things in the background and had a interesting, good, but also often mixed experience. The TLDR is that this is the best open weight model by far. It's the best bang for your buck you're ever going to get with any of these tools. That said, there are catches, and we'll get to all of those soon. So first, let's start with the benchmarks. Global state-of-the-art on the agentic benchmarks, such as HLE full set and browse comp. Those are some pretty legit benches, so it's crazy to see them beating those as hard as they are. Getting that score on Humanity's Last Exam is nuts. Like, meaningfully beating out Gemini 3 Pro on that is kind of crazy. In the browser comp agents, they are crushing in. Browser comp's a benchmark that OpenAI made for browser agents to see how well models can handle tasks in a browser. Kind of crazy to see OpenAI's own benchmark get trounced by an open weight model. Just nuts. And then when it comes to coding, things are really interesting too. They're not state of the art compared to the major labs doing closed weight models, but they're goddamn close. Remember, this is not Sonnet numbers. This is comparing to Opus 4.5 and GPT 5.2 on extra high. And it's neck and neck, still beating out Gemini 3 Pro, which isn't that surprising if you use Gemini 3 Pro a lot. It is not pleasant for work. My super hyped things here, though, are all of the image level ups. Not only does it now have visual recognition, it goes way further with it than I would have expected. For a handful of the image benchmarks, it's neck and neck with Gemini and ChatGPT and beating out Opus, which honestly has never been the best visual model, so that makes sense. Still awesome. And again, this solves my one major problem with the models, that it couldn't do anything with pictures. But where it gets even crazier is video. It is getting state-of-the-art in the long video bench and is right up there with Gemini for video MMMU. Historically, the Gemini models have been the best by far at visual tasks, especially image recognition, video recognition, and parsing, all of those types of things. I would argue this is the first time that an open weight model has made this much progress in not just getting near where the closed source models are, but really closing the gap on a fundamental level. It's so cool to see. Obviously, these are the benchmarks that they chose to publish, so how about the ones that they didn't? Our friends over at Artificial Analysis have, of course, updated their own benchmarks, and the results are pretty cool to see. K2.5 is the new leading open weights model, now closer than ever to the frontier, with OpenAI, Anthropic, and Google having the only models that are ahead. It's way better at agentic tasks. Its native multimodality is a huge win, which makes it capable of a lot more. It's the first time that a flagship model from Moonshot has image and visualization capabilities. It wasn't too expensive to run, especially against like Opus 4.5 and 5.2, but it's still 5 times more expensive than DeepSeek 3.2 or GPT OSS 120B were. That makes sense. It reasons a lot more. I would bet that if we look at the amount of tokens out, it's probably pretty high. Oh, apparently it's only moderate. Token usage comparable to other models in the same intelligence tier, using 82 million reasoning tokens across the Artificial Analysis Intelligence Index evaluation suite. Slightly lower than K2 was, and is much lower than GLM 4.7, which used an insane number of tokens. It is open weight, but it is also a trillion parameter model. It's 32B active because it's a mixture of experts. They're not going to go through all 1 trillion params on every single token gen. That's just how these things work now. But that still means it's 595 gigs. I love they say only 595 gigs. Meanwhile, something like GPT 120B, I can run on my own laptop. This one, chances are your Mac doesn't even have enough storage for this. It's also now a hybrid reasoning model. If you don't recall, K2 was not a reasoning model, and they had to do a K2 thinking version later. Now it's all just one model where you can turn thinking on or off, which is cool. And another really, really interesting piece, the hallucination rate is down a ton. It's a negative 11 on the AI Omniscience Index, which is their benchmark for how much models hallucinate. That is a relatively low hallucination rate, which is really cool to see. As mentioned before, the gap for open weight models is closing fast. Twitter's horrible rendering has this little button covering the thing that we're trying to look at there, but it does say Kimi K2.5 right underneath that. Sorry, but you can see here it's a pretty meaningful jump, and the Chinese open weight models are way far ahead of the US ones now. We haven't had a major drop from a US model for analysis that pushed the state of the art since OSS 120B, which was a great release, and I hope we see more of things like that. But for now, it's China just eating our breakfast, lunch, and dinner in the open weight world. And as I said before, the Omniscience Index is fantastic to see here. Negative 11 puts it way better than almost all open weight models, comically so. This is the best score we've seen on an open weight model for hallucinations. It's not as accurate overall, which is the proportion of correctly answered questions out of all questions, regardless of if it chose to answer. But one of the cool things that this benchmark measures is, will the model lie when it doesn't know, or will it say that it doesn't know? And this model seems very willing to say when it doesn't know, which helps it keep a pretty solid score here. It's cool to see. But the coolest thing to see is when you go to the homepage of Artificial Analysis, closed source, closed source, closed source, open source, closed source, closed source, open source. Like, this is the only open source model that has squeezed itself between these closed weight models from the major American labs. Huge win there. And of course, I had to run this on my own benchmarks, in particular SkateBench, and saw some very interesting things here, because K2 scored a 79%, which makes it a pretty big leap for state-of-the-art for open weight models in my little silly skateboard bench. Turns out this bench is actually pretty good at measuring meaningful regressions in models from major labs. I caught some regressions in spatial reasoning with 5.2 using this bench. So Kimi K2.5 being good at naming skate tricks might sound silly, but it also might be better at handling things like 3D space recognition. I also just made some changes that auto filter out certain models. So it looks like the best scores O3 Pro is actually perfectly matched with GPT-5 High. The issue is that GPT-5 has been trumped, so my changes assumed that it could hide that. We'll fix that later. I'll push this all. Thank you to Claude Code, which I have running over here for those changes. I'll figure out defaults more later. Regardless, really cool to see. And we look at the combined section here, where you also are measuring in the cost. You'll see a big part of why K2 is so exciting here. K2.5 has a very low cost, relatively speaking, and is still a good score. That said, surprisingly enough, O3 is still a better cost value in SkateBench at the very least, because it used way fewer tokens and still got correct answers. Kind of nuts. And O3 Pro, obviously, very expensive. But standard O3 and GPT-5 High both did very well. cost performance wise, and Gemini 3 Flash absurdly well. One of the highest scores I've seen. It actually crushed Gemini 3 Pro on this same bench. Turns out I'm not the only one that's seen that though. Marie actually sent this earlier today, and I think it's a funny fit. This is a benchmark for spatial reasoning for LLMs, specifically in a voxel world trying to find stuff. All of the major models are in this bench, and the only one that could find anything was Gemini 3 Flash. It got an 11 out of 22, and all of the other models got a 0. So it does seem like 3 Flash is weirdly good at spatial reasoning, and a lot of other models are not at all. Just thought that was an interesting thing to include. I do want to talk about what it's like coding with these, but I first want to talk about the features they added, specifically this agent swarm stuff, because it's very, very exciting. This model is not the fastest. I do expect that to change in the near future once the major hosts figure out all the quirks to hosting it well, especially things like Cerebras and Grok with a Q. But for now, we're seeing speeds between 30 and 70 TPS, depending on the lab and the place hosting it. The official Moonshot AI API, which is the lab that made it, it's 31 TPS. Fireworks has got it all the way up to 133 already, which is really cool to see, especially because it's the same price as the Moonshot ones are. It does not have cache enabled though, so you're going to have to pay a lot more for input tokens overall. That said, cool to see. But again, for the most part, the speeds aren't going to be the fastest thing in the world. 30 to 60 puts it at around the same speed as GPT 5.2. Yeah, around 47 TPS for 5.2, or with Opus 4.5, it's about 40 TPS, just for reference. So it's not going to be super fast. That could change in the future. This hosted version from Fireworks is insanely fast. So hopefully it'll get better. But it feels faster, especially when you're using it alongside the sub-agent stuff, because it could spin up a ton of things. I had a few different tasks I wanted to try this with. First, I wanted to try running it in my local CLI, and then I realized that Swarms is only a feature in their web interface right now. It is not a thing you can do over API. It is not a thing implemented in their CLI. I'm excited for a future where I can split up something like a linting task across a bunch of sub-agents, but that's not where we're at today. I did actually try that, and the CLI seems to be entirely broken. There's a CLI run I did to try and fix some lint errors in a project I was upgrading. It had a few hundred of them, but most of them could be fixed with just a prettier call. And then the rest could be very small, simple fixes that only need the context of the file they're in. I had already made this change with another model in the official GitHub repo for this project. But I wanted to see if K2.5 could do it, and I wanted to test the spawning of the sub-agent stuff. I told it this project has a ton of lint errors, spin up a swarm to address all of them in parallel, thinking it would be able to. It could not do that. Was sad, but that's fine. I'm using the official Kimi CLI, by the way. Was hoping it would have some more features than it does. It seems okay. It has some formatting issues, especially when you resize your window. But the bigger issue is that this task has been running now for 3 hours and isn't going to ever complete because one of the subtasks it spun up is just running. And also, to be clear, it did this all linearly. It wasn't running these in parallel. It would queue up 3 tool calls, and they would all run, and then it would go back to generating, but it didn't spin up sub-agents to work on things and parallelize the work being done at all. But it got stuck here, and I don't really know what to do. I just hit escape, which interrupted it, but I don't know where this ended up. Let's see, bun, run, lint. See how it did. 23 problems were left over. So it got most of them. It's a big project. It's been a fun one for testing things with. Yeah, previously it had 645 errors, and it was able to knock it down to 20, but that's still not a 0. And I suspect that if it didn't freeze, it probably would have been fine. So how do swarms work? I will show you. When you want to use a swarm, you currently have to do it through Kimi.com. Surprisingly decent for a lab that's focused is not their website, but as always, if you want the best experience with the new models, that will always be on t3.chat. We already have K2.5 supported, of course. Come check us out. We're only $8 a month. And if $8 a month is too expensive, use code cheap-bastard at checkout and you'll get your first month for just $1. Pretty good deal. Back to Kimi, though. Their site is fine. They have their own deep research thing. We'll have ours in the near future. But their agent swarm is what we're here for. Agent swarm can spin up multiple sub-agents to go do tasks and look into things in parallel. So if you have multiple theories, it can look into those. If you have things that make sense to parallelize, it can look into those. It seems really cool. The issue is I tried it 3 times, and 2 of the 3, it just didn't use the swarm. So here was a fun task. I'm building an AI chat app in Swift UI. Yeah, I'm working on a prototype of the T3 chat app in Swift for fun on the side. We'll talk about that a lot more in the future, believe me. It's having some issues with keyboard scroll behaviors and scroll stuff in general, so I discussed those here. I also wanted to give it enough context on the code without just handing it the whole code base, because I had to do this in the web app. So I asked Codex to summarize how the scrolling currently works and write it up in a markdown file. So I pasted that in as additional context, let it go do its thing. It created this comprehensive, actionable plan that I could copy paste as a prompt. which I did and it didn't work, sadly. So spoiler there. But at the end here, it had a couple questions, but also specified at the bottom of the UI here, Kimi completed this task directly. No agent swarm needed. Credits back to you. Try K2.5 thinking for similar tasks. So it told me that it didn't need the swarm for this and it didn't use it and that I got my credit back, which is cool, but I did want it to use swarm. I also wanted it to theorize more ways it could do this rather than just one main theory. So the second time I sent this prompt, I added a bit of info. I want you to research this deeply. Search the web to see how others have implemented this experience. Spin up multiple agents to explore different paths to get this right. I'm even down to move off of SwiftUI if that's what's best. This piece is what allowed it to spin up multiple sub-agents. And here's the result. It created one for SwiftUI scroll expertise, one for UIKit integration expertise, one for gesture conflict handling, one for keyboard handling expert, and a ChatGPT UX analyst to analyze how this works in ChatGPT's mobile app for comparison. And they even have a cute little UI for the UX analyst here because it makes like a persona, so to speak, for each of the layers. And then each of those goes and does its work. It's cute. Cool little UI. And then tasks are assigned to each of them. So this one was told about my problem with SwiftUI, gave in details about the current implementation, provide concrete code examples showing the best SwiftUI native approaches, include explanations of why each approach works and trade-offs compared to UIKit. Then a UIKit integration expert, which was told, include clear guidance on when to use this approach versus pure SwiftUI, return your findings as a structured report with complete code samples. This is pretty cool. The model is now trying different theories out with different framings and then bringing all of the results in to come to a different conclusion. And it came to some interesting results here. I actually read through all of it and it was cool. It said that there are two complete options for solutions. SwiftUI native, good for simple cases, handling the keyboard observer class, proper ignore safe area usage, sidebar gestures while scrolling disabled, 200 lines of production ready code, versus the UIKit wrapper, option B, recommended for production. Includes a complete UI view representable wrapper, UI table view for message rendering, perfect keyboard animation sync. The research confirmed that the top tier chat apps still use UIKit for message lists because the keyboard animation is perfectly synchronized, there's no jumps or race conditions, gesture conflicts are properly resolved, and self-sizing cells work reliably. Very interesting results. So I took what it generated, which is this pile of files of context, threw it into Codex, which I've found is slightly better at iOS than Claude Code, thus far at least. Could be wrong, but from my dicking around, it seems like Codex understands Apple's bullshit much better overall, so I figured this would be the best place to do it. I told it about all of this information and where to find those bits of text, and it went and built all of this. Replace the SwiftUI scroll stack with a UIKit-based collection view and rewired the chat screen to use it. I can show you the whole app. It's a little annoying to show you guys the whole app. Fuck it, I'll show you guys the whole app. Spoiler though, it's broken still. It's broken in different ways, but it's just as broken as before. Turns out dynamic scroll behaviors that can go in multiple different directions with something as annoying as a keyboard being involved, that is a virtual keyboard on the screen that things have to move out of the way of, that combo of things can be really painful. It broke bad. It also now gets stuck loading indefinitely too. So something it changed in the data model when it was making these changes broke as well. I don't know how much of this is because the instructions and plan were bad, how much of this is because GPT 5.2 is bad. Did I try this in Kimi? No, because I do not trust Kimi to make significant adjustments to an iOS project still. These things are hard. For fun, I'll have Claude Code try this as well. We'll see how Opus 4.5 does, but yeah. Not going to try Kimi on this task because I know Kimi will not perform well in this task. I did try it for other things though and had very interesting results. As I mentioned before, I had it do a full image studio. It is here and it works. Let's generate Pelican riding a bicycle in Tokyo. There we go. Oh no, I have a key that has no tokens. Give me one sec. Foul. Yeah, turns out generating a lot of images for demos is expensive. Thank you to my sponsors. Try this again, same prompt. GPT image 1.5 is still failing because of some weird formatting stuff. For some reason, the model really wanted to use webhooks instead of waiting for the generation to complete with the original API calls, which breaks GPT image for some reason. But the other models were working fine. Hopefully they are still working fine and that the fixes it did for 1.5 don't break things more. Speaking of breaking, I ran into a lot of broken things when trying to use this model in OpenCode. Obviously, the Kimi CLI had its own problems, which is why I moved to OpenCode, but OpenCode had its own issues as well. Here, I had an issue where, and you can tell from the snippet there, it had a generation running. I had it redoing the UI for this project, and after some back and forth, the image in the data set seemed to push it over the limit for how big the payload could be when it posts to the official OpenCode APIs, which caused it to break. And I got payload too large like everywhere on the UI and couldn't fix it. So I had to make a new thread and switch over to K2.5 over the official API instead, which has been better, but still has problems. Yeah. But at the very least, it does work. It does generate images. I can download them. I am happy overall. It's impressive that it can do this type of thing. This is a task that I had it mock out UIs for just 6 months ago. I would have models make a fake UI for this to test their UI prowess. Now I can also tell them to implement the whole thing, and they will. Pretty crazy if you think about it. Like, this is not a task I ever thought these models would be capable of doing, and here they are, open weight models that are like not that expensive that you can download and theoretically run yourself, capable of building full-on applications that are usable. Obviously, when you use more expensive models like Opus 4.5 and put more time and more back and forth in, you can get really beautiful stuff like what we have here, which, as you can tell from here, I've been using the new T3 canvas for a lot of work for thumbnails and plan to continue to do that in the future. Pretty nuts. But this is not that far off. And considering that this is the most expensive state-of-the-art model right now, and this is something that didn't have any reference to the other code base and just kind of freehanded it in under an hour with 2 follow-up prompts for errors, really, really good. Especially because I did this initial generation without having thinking on, because I didn't realize thinking is off by default in OpenCode. Dax, we need to have a talk. Yeah. Anyways, thought that was really cool. I did want to try this again with thinking on, so I am doing that. It's asking really good questions. I just answered the questions. It didn't do the tool call to make the UI for the questions come up, which is interesting. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. We'll see how this behaves. All looks good. I made this fancy little diagram. All of these fuck up the spacing like that, which is annoying, but overall looking good. Build away. Make sure it looks beautiful. Dark mode only. Left sidebar for input. Use your front end design skill and the convex best practices skill to make your implementation fantastic. I know there's the experimental plan mode. It has been very broken when I tried it before, so I'm not trying it right now. I'm sorry, chat. One interesting thing I wanted to talk about with Kimi is the usage through their subscription. They have their own sub tiers, which I decided to do. I'm on their middle tier, which is $40 a month on the monthly. It's slightly cheaper if you do the annual plan. I was expecting quite a bit because like the model's cheaper. They're trying really hard. $40 should get quite a bit of usage, right? Well, I almost used up my 4-hour limit, which I did not expect. Like I got real close to it. And my weekly balance is actually trimmed quite a bit too. Obviously, it's resetting somewhat soon, thankfully. But I would have maxed this out with like 1 or 2 more real tasks. I was surprised just how quickly I ate through these limits on this plan. It's possible things like caching aren't being implemented properly by OpenCode or just aren't functioning as they need to yet. I'd expect the amount you can get for this limit to go up, not down, because it's a lot lower than I would have expected for my usage here. So based on the things you hear in this video, don't assume you can go subscribe to the $20 or $40 plan and immediately get an insane amount of unlimited usage. That has not been my experience so far. And just to right size my usage here, I would guess that I've done like 1/5 to 1/8 as much with Kimi today as I would do in a given day with either Claude Code or Codex. So it's just not that much usage from here. That said, according to people I trust, like Canada Honk, someone tweeted they could still use it when the limit hit 0, so the UI could just be bugged. So that's possible as well. Just thought you should know. As always, the models are struggling with Tailwind v3 versus v4. Yeah, it's struggling to get the Tailwind setup done. It'll figure it all out eventually. It did the last time too, but interesting to see. While that is running, we do have more to talk about. Simon has his post, and in his post, he included a very interesting detail, which is that it's a modified MIT license. So while it is open weight, and you can go download the weights and do what you want with them, if you're a big company, they do have a carve-out, which is that if your product or service has more than 100 million monthly active users or makes more than $20 million in monthly revenue, then you have to prominently display Kimi K2.5 on the user interface of such a product or service. So in the case of T3 Chat, you don't know if we have 100 million users a month or 20 million a month of revenue because we're going to display it anyways. So we are compliant with this license. Others might not be. The main reason that this tends to be included is to keep big companies from just stealing all of the work and the weights and doing small things to it and then not disclosing it. Like imagine a lab wanting to make a better coding model, instead of building everything from scratch, just distills K2.5 or trains something on top of it or adjusts the weight slightly, calls it their own thing. This license callout specifies that they can't do that. They have to specify that it is still based on K2.5. They've had callouts like this before. I expect them to continue in the future. A lot of these bigger open weight drops tend to have carve-outs like this now. I don't love that. I like open source, meaning open source. That said, open source is a weird concept in models in general because you can't get the stuff to reproduce the result because nobody's sharing their techniques or their data or all the other things that have to go into this. And chances are they can't, because a lot of things in there are not available for redistribution. Like if you paid a company money to get data from them to use for training, you probably don't have the right to distribute that data. So if they were to distribute everything you need to recreate the model, they'd probably not be able to make as good of a model because they'd have to share things that they can't right now, and they'd have to remove that data if they were to. So yeah, open weight is a weird thing. It's still a really good thing. It still means really cool things can happen on top of this. But if you're a really valuable company, you need to call it Kimi K2.5 if it is based on Kimi K2.5. None of these callouts have been tested in the courts yet. It would be interesting to see if a lab was to do something on top of Kimi K2.5 and modify it a meaningful amount. Would this license term still hold? Good question. I'm sure this will be a thing that is played out in the courts within the next year, probably. They have been bragging a lot about the quality of the front-end interfaces that it generates, and I get why. Open weight models have never been good at front-end, like, at all before. But this is a really cool interface that was built, apparently entirely using Kimi K2.5. It's a genuinely really cool website. It has its weird edges, like the way that the borders overlap here makes it look a little jank, but it's cool. This is a pretty cool looking one. It's doing interesting things. Like the websites it's designing aren't just the traditional like formatted homepage with a sidebar. They are doing interesting things with a lot of the designs. Capability in visuals stems from massive scale vision text joint pre-training. At scale, the trade-off between vision and text capabilities disappears. They improve in unison. Very interesting. This example is actually pretty nuts. They gave it this gigantic maze, this PNG that has absurd paths in it. Like that is impossible to even see. Like I'm assuming that my compression is probably breaking right now. And they asked it to find the shortest path from the green dot on the top left to the bottom right dot that's red in the corner on the other side. It found the locations for the dots by executing Python code. It converted the image to a binary maze, again using Python, implemented BFS, and then found an answer and even generated a visualization of it. That's really cool. It crushed their own internal benchmark for code. Of course it did. They wouldn't have released it if it didn't. They have a bunch of details about Swarm here, which is really cool too. As they said before, 100 sub-agents executing parallel workflows across up to 1,500 coordinated steps without predefined roles or handcrafted workflows. So none of this like defining your own sub-agents in a config somewhere. Still really cool though. I'd argue cooler that you don't have to deal with all that. It just figures out who the sub-agents, so to speak, should be, and it can go and do all of those things. They did this through parallel agent reinforcement learning, which is used a trainable orchestrator agent to decompose tasks into parallelizable subtasks, each executed by dynamically instantiated frozen sub-agents. Running these subtasks concurrently significantly reduces end-to-end latency compared to sequential agent execution. So if I'm understanding this correctly, what they did is they took existing like work that was done properly using other traditional agents that are just one path, one track, single agent runs, like what we do every day in our tools. They took those results and then had a separate trainable orchestrator agent look at those outputs and reconstruct them into what would it look like if we did this in parallel. They generated these fake runs of a parallel version of the same task and then used that for reinforcement learning. That makes a ton of sense. Since these chat histories in our code tools are what these things are using, it's like this is what the models are being used for 90% of the time now. Stuff like this. Histories and a bunch of tool calls being run for a long time. We no longer want to just train this on traditional data that you find from scraping the web. The data of how people use things like OpenCode or Claude Code or Cursor or Codex, that chat history data is way more valuable than the data on the web as it stands today. So more and more of the training is going to be fake versions of those histories that are being handed to the models and part of the training process to make ideal chat experiences. If you can construct an ideal fake chat in retro as in like you take a change that you want to make, you ask the model to do it, it does it wrong, so you go fix it. You can use the before and after to generate a fake chat history. That is going to be more and more how these models are trained, is by creating the exact history that they would want to see the model produce, and then use that as training data to make it do the thing. That said, once you do the parallel stuff, it gets pretty challenging. They specify that it's challenging due to a delayed, sparse, and non-stationary feedback from independently running subagents. Common failure mode is serial collapse, where the orchestrator defaults to single agent execution despite having parallel capability. To address this, their parallel agent reinforcement learning process employs staged reward shaping that encourages parallelism early in the training and gradually shifts focus towards task success. Very interesting. So over the history of the run, it moves away from we want everything in parallel and towards we want an answer that is correct. Cool to see them sharing this much. It almost feels like there's a race between Moonshot and Kimi versus GLM 4.5 and ZAI versus Minimax for who can overtake DeepSeek in everything from the quality of the models to the quality of the research and information they are sharing about it. And they're pulling their weight here. This is really cool to see. Yeah, the orchestrator first creates the subagents, because again, it's not using subagents that you've already defined in a config. It is making them specific to you based on your task. So it generates these subagents, and then it assigns tasks to all of them from the orchestrator layer, which is again an agent. And then in this example, it uses the fact checker subagent that they made to check the results and make sure that they're all good. An agent swarm has an orchestrator that dynamically creates specialized subagents and decomposes complex tasks into parallelizable subtasks for efficient distributed execution. Apparently, this led to an 80% reduction in end-to-end runtime for their benchmarks internally, while also enabling more complex long horizon workloads as shown below. Here you can see as the tasks get more complex, it can save more. All makes sense. I would suspect every lab to have something along the lines of what they're doing here within the next 3 to 6 months, other than Google because they take their time. But I would be very surprised if we don't see other labs shipping similar things, not just in the models either, but in the tools that we're using with them too. Because like, open code has to be rebuilt a little bit to support this type of workflow. Oh, look at that. They did a YouTuber thing here. Task to identify the top 3 YouTube creators across 100 niche domains. The 2.5 agent swarm first researches and defines each domain, then it autonomously created 100 subagents to conduct parallel searches. Each subagent identifies leading creators within an assigned niche, and the results, which were 300 YouTuber profiles, are aggregated into a structured spreadsheet. Okay. It's just hunting by sub count. That's lame. Still so cool, though, that it can do things like that. They talked about spreadsheets and document stuff a lot. They really focused on like using it locally for tasks like your spreadsheet management, editing Word docs, changing PDFs, stuff like that. Seems like they're thinking deeply about the whole co-work use case that we saw with Claude over the last week or two. These are the things that the labs are chasing now. It's a lot less like, how nice does it write? And a lot more, how much work can it do? What things can it do given the right tools? Which is the direction this has all been going for a while. Still cool to see. Sadly, the only time the word writing comes up on this entire page is when they're talking about writing LaTeX equations, which sucks because the thing I've loved most about Kimi for a while is the quality of the writing output. That's why I still use it as my day-to-day. And Kimi K2.5 still is pretty good at writing. It's also still a total asshole. This model is much more willing to like go at your ego than anything else I've used. I obsessively notate at the end of every day what I did in the day, and I put it all in a single text file to have models roast me and give me feedback on myself. All of the other models are willing to give me some hard feedback, but they're really nice about it. It's like, you work too hard and you care too much about your team. K2 and K2.5 are a lot harsher. Enough so that I can't show you the whole response because it goes deep on like very personal things in said journal. But it ended with this. You're not a chaotic genius, you're a genius who's chaotic. One of those is fixable. Fix it before the recovery days become permanent. It's brutal. But as we all know, the best engineers are brutal too, so let's see how its results came out here. It got the exact same error that the non-thinking version got. It has a bunch of type errors. Yeah, it fucked up bad. The models can solve specific pointed work. I would argue most of them can now. K2.5 seems very capable of it. But the best models are the ones that not only can do the work, but can identify what's missing from the work they have to do and then do that instead. An example I saw Pete talking about, Pete, the ClaudeBot creator, when he was working on adding voice mode to ClaudeBot, he first wanted to see how the result would come out on the server side. So he just sent voice data over push, like just a standard post request. And when the model saw that it got binary data back, that looked like it could be audio data, it saved it as a file, ran it through off of MPEG, confirmed it was audio, found an API it could use to do voice to text, did that, got the text, and then responded without them having to write any code for audio mode by just giving it the wrong thing and the right harness. It could go figure out what that was, which is insane. But the best models are the ones that can unblock themselves in those crazy ways. None of the open source models can yet. Kimi K2.5, when not blocked, seems to behave really, really well. But for things it doesn't have yet or doesn't know yet, like TypeScript and the TypeScript setup for type checking, it won't do that without being told to or being steered towards it. Like I just had to. It just wrote a bunch of code that fails because it has type errors in it that it didn't care to notice, much less address. I do want to see how it handled the scroll behavior updates. Not very good. Remember that thing I said earlier about Claude Code being bad at iOS? I stand behind what I said. Claude Code is terrible at iOS. Kimi K2 is not going to be able to solve this. Codex is okay at iOS. The rest suck at it. Honestly, this follow-up run has been revealing. It's entirely broken. The text flickers in when I refresh. The CSS just broke entirely. The page fails to load because it's hitting queries that don't exist. These are things I don't see in the state-of-the-art models from the major labs. Like this exact same prompt on GPT 5.2 Codex or on Opus 4.5, hell, even on Sonnet 4.5 is going to generate a working result first try. Kimi K2.5 is a huge leap for open weight, and if things continue to progress at this rate, we will have open source models that are as good as Opus by end of year for sure, but it's not there yet. It's goddamn close, but it's not there yet. Took a bit for Kimi K2.5 to get everything fixed. I had to show it the things that were broken. It really struggled with Tailwind 4, so when I told it that it sucks at Tailwind, here's a screenshot of the site being broken, it went and downgraded to V3, which appears to have worked, and now the whole thing appears to work. With sync, with things persisting when you refresh, with all the fun things you get from stuff like Convex. Yeah, I can select some models. Let's do Nano Banana Pro, GPT Image 1.5, everything fails to handle that one right. Well, you have 3 models selected. Tell it to do, I don't know, 2 sea lions sharing an ice cream cone in Tokyo. It did not get enter to submit right, sadly, but it did get all the UI pieces right. This looks fine. This is totally passable. It has a bit of a weird look to it. I do not prefer it to what I got out of Opus with the front-end design skill, but it's fully functioning. And the difference between this and the previous run is that I told it to use its skills a bit more, and it had thinking on, which the first time it did not. Yeah, it works. Honestly, nuts you can do this with an open source model. It's going to drive the curve down a lot on who can use these things. It's nice to know that if you don't have the money to spend on the super expensive stuff, you're only a few months behind because the cheaper stuff happens so quick now. I actually really like how Canada Honk put this in chat. All open source models sadly lack a certain something. I totally agree. And I honestly feel the same about Gemini models too. There's like a touch of reliability and consistency that nobody has other than OpenAI and Anthropic right now. Everything else just has this like taste of unreliability and inconsistency. Only OpenAI and Anthropic have consistently solved this, in my opinion, where I like don't see it step on some stupid random thing and get lost as a result. And I'm concerned that the swarms are going to make this problem worse, not better. That said, I'm seeing it less here than I have on any other open weight model, and I'm seeing it way less here than I saw on even state-of-the-art models halfway into last year. Things are moving so goddamn fast. I would not be surprised if there's an open weight model that feels just as good as an Opus or a Sonnet or a GPT 5.2 very, very soon. I'm getting a taste of it here. I really am. It's wild to think that this is an open weight model that is a thing you can go download from the internet and use inside of an open source harness too, by the way. So this is an open weight model in an open source harness building real applications. Open source is behind the state of the art, but it's not that far behind. And I've seen it now, and you should go play with it too. Is this the best model ever made? No. Does it make me really, really excited for the future? Yes. I really am hyped to where things are going, and I hope you guys are too. Let me know how you're feeling about this release, and if you care at all about open weight models, or if you're just going to keep using Claude Code or Codex or whatever else you're on. Seriously though, curious how you guys feel about this because I'm really hyped. Let me know what you guys think. Until next time, peace nerds.